Hello. Anybody here yet? Doesn't seem so.
Hello. Hello.
Hi. Hi. Well, thank you so much. I'm Roger Marcus. I'm in charge of programming at our synagogue.
Oh, hello.
And
I've had it plugged up for a while. I just need to, I'm still getting set up here.
okay.
Suzanne.
Yes.
I didn't know you were connected with the synagogue. Suzanne. Well, that makes me very happy to see you. I don't hear her, but I do see her.
Yeah, she's muted. Suzanne, you're muted.
You're muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hey.
Hey.
I also have to do my virtual background.
I try to figure out where you are. I see the
I'm in my kitchen. I'm in my kitchen.
I'm in my attic. Can I try to share screen right quick? Let me just.
Yeah, let's do that. So I just have to make you a co-host.
Okay.
And now you should be able to do that.
No problem. Still setting up here.
So the share screen is the little green icon in the middle on this bottom. Yep.
All right. So you should be, I'm not sure what you see, but let me try to play from start.
Okay.
And you should be able to see that.
Yeah, but
all right, we're good with that.
So there I see the image on the whole screen. Now I see the image on the whole screen. Before I was seeing your desktop partly.
Okay. Okay. So you see it, and all you see is a picture?
Just the picture.
Okay,
I can't
perfect.
breathe.
Okay, good. All right, so I'll come off sharing the screen. And so I'll share it when it's time. So let me email my script.
And there is Barbara. She just joined, and
Okay,
Barbara is
good.
the person who arranged for you to be speaking to us today. So
hello, Barbara. How are you? I think you're muted, Barbara, as well. But you're muted, but your face is animated like you're happy. So I'm. But you are muted.
I heard you speak at the Office of Multicultural Affairs at Hopkins, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And I've been eager since then to hear you again. So actually,
I'm glad to see.
I was going to ask, I'll say it now, even though it's pre-chat. I mean, it's instead of typing it into the chat room. We have that you have this radio show and that it's been so well received and so forth and so on. But I haven't been able to find a channel number and a time and date. So if you would mention maybe when you're
I will tell it. Yep, it comes on every day actually. So
really?
On it comes on, just so you know, it comes on 88.9.
Okay.
88.9 FM.
Right.
Which is WEAA, and it comes on Monday through Friday, 3 to 5 p.m.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 3 to 5?
3 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep, not a problem.
Well, I mentioned that you have the show and that it's award-winning in my intro for when everybody else comes on, but I didn't have the information about when it's available. So I think it would be good for people to know that.
Oh, absolutely. In case they want to listen, that'd be great. Great. Okay, so I'm going to cut some more lights on here. It looks very dark behind me. And so I'm still setting up. We're starting at 5, correct?
We're starting at 5, so we're good.
All right. So, I'm going to mute my background and take off my video so I can turn some more lights on and get set up. All right, thank you.
Okay. Okay, mine's
All right,
dark too,
super.
but I don't have.
Super. So Barbara, I don't think I need to make you a co-host, but I do need to make Jeannie.
Right, because Jeannie said she's going to have it. It's going to be it's going to record automatically. We don't
Yeah,
have-
and actually, unfortunately, it's recording now, which and this automatic. So
and we can't edit after the fact, huh?
so we're recording all this small talk.
Okay, so we should only say really significant things now.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And actually, well, actually, no, I don't use this site for the ECPC meetings. I have my own Zoom account that I use for ECPC. So we won't be recording that. How was your psychological association meeting?
It was good. I hated to get out of it early because it was really excellent. The speaker was just wonderful, but they did say that they could send me a copy of his PowerPoint slides. So, I'll have the last 15 minutes of his program, I guess, that way. So.
Yeah, I still attend occasional rheumatology CMEs.
Right.
But I don't have to take notes as avidly as I used to.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm planning to practice anymore, but I don't want to give up the possibility. So okay. I'm keeping up my license, at least for the meanwhile.
Yeah.
So plus it's just, fun to hear because it's, mostly topics I'm interested in. And, right. And I get to see all my old colleagues, of course, now I
see anybody
on Zoom, but it's all right. It's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about, driving or if there's snow or, there's a lot to be said for Zoom meetings, even if we weren't in the midst of a pandemic. So.
Yeah, I mean, we might want to do some of our ECPC meetings on Zoom, even after the pandemic. But not everyone.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything, it has its pluses and its minuses.
So.
I saw they had out more footage from the Capitol. They had additional footage that they didn't have the other day. And it's just horrifying.
But there apparently is some that they don't want to show. That is too violent to show. It's absolutely terrible. And the light at the end of the tunnel might be that there'll be the introduction of a very expansive social action program. The Biden's $1 trillion coronavirus program, which includes a lot of help for poor children, a lot of help for hungry children.
That'd be great.
And it has a lot of better subsidies for Obamacare. So maybe they'll, I mean, obviously there'll be a lot of pushback, but
yeah,
and it's not going to get passed exactly like it is. But
good to see everybody.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple of people who are planning to come but I think very few people check the attending option on the Harry bulletin board, they just show up. So
Mhm.
we have sort of no idea how many people to
Yeah.
expect.
I had to write to Alyssa Hazard, and she is probably coming, and had a lot of people register from out of the congregation.
Right. Oh, they registered on the bulletin board?
They
Because when I looked, there were only 3. You and me
they have a place for non-members to register. You actually registered on that place.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
I didn't realize I registered on a non-member place.
Well, maybe it wasn't specific. I don't know, but we had I think 3 or 4 non-members register.
Yeah.
Oh, Barbara, when we start, when you introduce Professor Whitehead, can you say at the beginning? Oh, I lost my
the chat.
Say at the beginning that next week we're having a movie night on Saturday night to show all things illuminate. Everything is illuminated.
Right,
And
wait a minute. Next Saturday, so that's the
23rd.
23rd.
We're going to show everything is illuminated. Just if you feel comfortable doing that, as
Sure.
a quick announcement. And also on Sunday the 24th, Doris Lefkowitz is going to give a Limud on hospitality and inclusiveness.
When?
The 24th, next Sunday.
September 24th?
No, January 24th.
Oh, I put Saturday and then I read it as September. All right. So Sunday, the 24th.
Yep.
Doris Lefkowitz, is it?
That's it. That's her.
I mean, I know who it is. I'm just not sure. I don't think I've ever said her name out loud. Radical hospitality. Okay.
Actually, she took out the word radical from it, which I'm happy about. So it's now on hospitality and inclusiveness. Because it's not a radical thing to be hospitable.
What time is the Sunday one?
5 o'clock. 5 o'clock.
And what time is the Saturday movie?
Right now, 7 o'clock. Although there's possibility that we'll have Havdalah or something else beforehand. But
okay. Bring your own popcorn, huh?
The movie is at 7. All right, so we're approaching.
Roger, it's this Saturday night?
What's that?
It's this Saturday night?
Correct.
The 23rd.
Because we're scheduled to have Ma'ariv Devar Abdullah at 6:15. It should be over by 7, so I'm just letting you know.
Oh, are we? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, we're alternating between Saturday morning services and Saturday night services for the people,
right.
So that people that won't use electronics on Shabbat will have something every other week.
Okay.
So it's 7
right.
o'clock on the 23rd, following 6:15 Ma'ariv and Havdalah.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, that's perfect. That's great. That was almost a conflict. Okay. All righty. So I think it is 1 minute to 5. So I think we could start in just a minute.
All right. Well, especially since if you want me to give a couple of announcements first,
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll get that out of the way so we don't cut into Dr. Whitehead's time.
Okay, sure.
So.
And I don't see Jeannie yet, but oh yeah, there she is. She is a co-host already. Good.
Here. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Whitehead. Nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, I do a couple of introductions. Jeannie Glazer is the chair of our synagogue. And Roger Marcus is the director of the Committee for Educational and Cultural Programming, which is what's sponsoring tonight. So
I think we can begin, Dara.
okay. All right. Give me 1 sec to switch. My printer's not working, so I'm going to have to sort of read my intro off the the screen. So I have to move to a different spot. Okay. Now you'll know it's not off the cuff. What can I say? All right. Good evening to all of you. On behalf of Chevron Tzedek Educational and Cultural Program Committee, let me just say we're very happy to have you all joining us here for the program tonight. Our committee's been working to provide a variety of opportunities for learning, inspiration, community building, and sometimes just plain fun. Please let us know if you have ideas for additional topics you'd like to hear about or to present yourself. We also encourage members to help support our programming by your financial sponsorship, and you can see details on how to do that on the Chevron Tzedek weekly newsletter. The two programs that are coming up in the immediate future are Saturday, the 23rd, next Saturday at 7 p.m. We're going to show the movie Everything is Illuminated. And before that, we're going to have services at 6:15, Marav and Havdalah. So next Saturday, 6:15, Marav and Havdalah, followed by 7 o'clock, Everything is Illuminated. The next day, Sunday, the 24th at 5 p.m., we're going to have a Limud given by Doris Lefkowitz on hospitality and inclusiveness. And now on to tonight. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Kaye Wise Whitehead to speak for our annual commemoration of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Whitehead will speak to us about confronting poverty, anti-racist behavior and practices, and coalition building. Dr. Whitehead is an associate professor of communication and African American studies at Loyola University Maryland. She's the host of the award-winning radio show Today with Dr. K, which comes on every day, Monday to Friday, on radio station 88.9, Monday to Fridays from 3 to 5 p.m. I just learned the time, so I thought I'd add that in. Dr. Whitehead in 2020 was selected by the Daily Record as one of Maryland's top 100 women, and by Baltimore Sun as the best radio host. In 2019, she received the Collegium Visionary Award from the College of Holy Cross and the Exceptional Merit in Media Award, the EMMA, from National Women's Political Caucus. The Baltimore Sun named her as one of Baltimore's 25 women to watch in 2019, and Essence Magazine included her on their 2019 Woke 100 list of Black women advocating for change. Dr. Whitehead will leave time at the end of her talk for us to ask questions, so please feel free to write your questions in the chat section of the Zoom screen. And now it's my great honor and pleasure to present to you Dr. Kaye Whitehead.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here in this very weird virtual space. I still have not gotten used to the world of Zoom, even though I know this is our reality. It makes things so much easier, but there's a little feeling that it makes things less personal, right? To be, at home, where I'm professionally dressed up top and I have my pajamas and slippers on the bottom. So we are all in a different space. I want to begin by recognizing my dear friend, Suzanne Kilson. I am so excited. I did not know she was going to be here, and seeing her just brings me such a feeling of delight, and makes me a lot more comfortable in any space that I'm in when I can see people that I know and I love and that I care about. So Suzanne, I'm happy to see you after so many months of not seeing you. My goal tonight is to talk a little bit about Dr. King and a little bit about what we do with this. It's always interesting whenever we hit this time of the year. I do a lot of speaking. I think I've given over 500 keynotes around the world. And my biggest time to speak always starts on Dr. King's birthday until the end of February. And everybody wants to cram all the Black history they know into 1 month. Everybody knows exactly who Dr. King is. I mean, when you start talking about the continuum of African-American history in this country, there are certain names that are taught in the K-12 educational system. That, students learn about Harriet Tubman. They learn about Frederick Douglass. They learn about Dr. King. Now, depending upon how old they are, they're learning about Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, right? Like they're going to learn about Kamala Harris in years to come. But Dr. King sits as a singular kind of visionary figure that we all coalesce around as, you know, the only African American to have a statue down at the Smithsonian, the only African American to have a day named after him. He was not an elected official, he's not a president, but he was the person for all intents and purposes that the civil rights movement was built around, even though we know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did not start the civil rights movement, nor did he end it, but he was that visionary leader. I've been thinking a lot about Dr. King for my talks this year. Like, what exactly am I looking to share? We've had a very difficult last 4 years. If you want to speak very generally, it has been really, really challenging. And as an African American, I would argue that, you know, it's been challenging since 2009, since the year after Barack Obama was elected. It just got extremely difficult for Black people in this country because we have the rise of Black Lives Matter. It was a direct pushback that we are celebrating having a Black man in the White House, and we are talking about the ways in which Black people, Black children are being killed. And so with the launch of the Black Lives Matter movement under Barack Obama in 2014, it was kind of these two worlds coming together. You're both at this point where you have a Black man as the most powerful person, not just in the country, really around the world. If you think about, you know, the power of the presidency, but then you have the reality of Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Mike Brown. And if you remember that time period, and I hope that you do, it was 1 week after the next of having to witness Black death and suffering on our screens. If you're someone who is connected to social media at all, it was a constant barrage of video clips that showed Black people getting killed, Black people suffering, and Black people dying. And it only got worse under Donald Trump, because it's not that the killing stopped, it's just the pushback really got amped up, where instead of just being shot and killed by police officers or would-be vigilantes, you started having this pushback of predominantly white women calling the police on Black men, women, and children for simply living our lives. Call the police when we're selling water. Call the police when we're walking down the street. Call the police when we're sitting in the restaurant. Now, calling the police is not on the same level as being killed by the police, but research shows that when Black people come in contact with the police, it does impact us. It raises our blood pressure. It causes stomach issues. It leads to headaches, like this constant feeling of being watched and targeted was just as horrible as what was happening with the singular killing of Black men, women, and children. So here we are, after 4 years of Donald Trump, only a week and a half or so of this failed insurrection on the eve of the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for her historic election and inauguration. And we're still trying to figure out where we go from here. On Friday, I had an opportunity to sit down with Dr. Claiborne Carson. And Dr. Claiborne Carson is the founding director of the King Papers Project. Many of you might know his work. In 1985, Coretta Scott King gave Dr. Carson all of Dr. King's papers, unfinished manuscripts, all of his notes. And interesting, he told me on Friday that when Coretta Scott King first called him and asked him to take charge of all of her husband's papers, he actually said, "No, thank you," and he hung up the phone. And his wife turned to him screaming, going, "Did you just hang up on Coretta Scott King and tell her no? No one does that." And he said, "Well, I don't want to spend the rest of my life studying Dr. King. I'm not a King scholar." And his wife, and he said, you know, his wife is always right. I'm a married woman. I said, amen to that. His wife is always right. And she said, if you don't call her back and get those papers, this will be something that you'll always look in the rearview mirror and regret not doing. And so he did. And he has devoted his life to Dr. King's papers. What I asked him on Friday, which is really the basis of my talk today, I asked them, what do we get wrong about Dr. King? Right? Because everyone wants to say this is what King would do. And we talk about King the visionary and King, and his work around nonviolence, without forgetting the fact that King believed in, carrying weapons up until he really adopted the nonviolent stance. And we want to, take King down to I Have a Dream and talk about how popular he was without recognizing the fact that by the time we got to the end of Dr. King's life, his popularity had really shrank in this country. I mean, he was down to, the 19s, 18s in terms of the percentile of people who appreciate him. He was hated near the end of his life by both the Black and the white community. It wasn't just the white community that hated him. It was also the Black community, because he started dealing with the Poor People's Campaign. And nobody wants to talk about economics. It's much easier to talk about race and to say we've overcome when we really haven't, because if people can't eat, then you haven't overcome. So I said, well, what do we get wrong about Dr. King? And what I thought was interesting is he said people fail to recognize that Dr. King was human with flaws, who made mistakes. And if Dr. King was still alive, he'd still be fighting the good fight. That Dr. King, in all of his private writings, spoke about kind of the long journey towards equality, which today we talk about equity. He wrote about the long journey towards justice. Today we talk about in the long journey to being a part of the conversation. And so I think about that, and in talking about my work, my topic for today is redeeming the soul of our nation, and wondering if that can actually happen. Can we redeem the soul of our nation with the inauguration on Wednesday? And for a lot of people, Wednesday is supposed to be the glorious day of awakening, right? Like they're saying that the nation's going to start again on Wednesday at 12:01 a.m., that the sun's going to shine brighter, the waters are going to split, justice is going to come rolling down the hill once we pack up the current resident of the White House and we usher in this new vision. And for those of us who've lived longer than a couple of years, we know that after we party at 12:01, we're still going to hit almost 400,000 people dead of COVID-19 by that evening. That after we celebrate with all the music and the poetry and the song and the feelings of inspiration, there are people who are clamoring for a second stimulus check because they're unable to meet their bills that they had from October. So it's been a long journey. And so redeeming the soul of our nation, it was 189 years in December that we looked at the fact that freedom fighter Nat Turner was hanged in Jerusalem, Virginia. At that time, the US Census noted that the population stood at about 12.9 million people. And you had roughly 2 million enslaved men, women, and children, and about 319,000 free Black people. This is right at the height of trying to reconcile ourselves with Nat Turner and his story and what he believed in and what he fought for. Most of the enslaved people in this country lived in the South, but there were about 150,000 enslaved people who lived further up north. If you take that from 189 years ago, this year it's been 151 years since we had the ratification of the 15th Amendment. And that is the amendment, of course, that guaranteed the right to vote for Black men. With the ratification of the 15th Amendment, it's important to note that when that amendment was ratified, it was only 5 years after slavery ended and the KKK began. Like, you had the rise of white nationalism and white supremacy only 5 years after we ended American slavery. It was 149 years ago this year that race leader and suffragist Charlotte Rollin, this is a Black woman, but she joked 149 years ago that she should run for vice president of the United States. And it's interesting that even though she did not run, because she was, she was publishing papers and she was writing in the newspaper, like, I should run for vice president. And at that time, nobody could understand or believe that a Black woman was saying, yeah, I should run to be the second most powerful person of this country. It was a joke back then, right? And she was talking about using her power to change this country. Well, she didn't run, but in 1952, only 22 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, Charlotta Bass did. Charlotta Bass was a vice presidential nominee, and she did run for the Progressive Party. And that was the first time that for Black women, when we start talking about entering into the circles where the decisions are being made, that was an incredible moment. Again, it was not for the Democratic Party, Republican Party, it's the Progressive Party, but Charlotta Bass is part of the understanding of the continuum of Black women when it comes to politics. Now, the week that we were celebrating, the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we hit 48 years after Shirley Chisholm, who we all know her name, she mounted her campaign for the White House. Now, she said that she wasn't running to win. Now, this is odd because who mounts an election and they're not doing it to win? She knew that they were not going to send a Black woman up to be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States. She said, but what she was running for, she was running to pull together enough delegates to be in a position to negotiate with the winning candidate on behalf of the rights of women, of Black people, and Indigenous communities. Her idea was that if she pulls together a strong enough platform, that she has bargaining power when she gets to the table. Shirley Chisholm, who we understand would walk through the halls on Congress, and she said she would enter into rooms and she would be told that there were not enough chairs available for her to sit down. That's when that famous idea of hers coming that she should just carry her own chair with her wherever she went. Shirley Chisholm told stories about how whenever she would walk past tables of white men in Congress, they would make sure there was never a seat for her to sit down and eat. And at the empty seats, they would make sure they put a handkerchief after they spit in it in the seat so she would not have a place to sit down. And she said, even with all of that, she understood that in order to change this country so that Black people and women and Indigenous people can be part of the conversation, we have to be in the room, even if we have to fight to get there. When I think about Shirley Chisholm, it does remind me of Kamala Harris and her mom saying, you may be the first, but make sure you're not the last. That sense of Shirley Chisholm 48 years ago, that was the same year that Joe Biden was elected to the US Senate. Like sometimes I forget that Joe Biden has been around for a very long time. He was elected to the US Senate when Shirley Chisholm was running for president and Kamala Harris was starting second grade. Like if you think about it, history and context really matters because as James Baldwin reminds us, history is not the past, it is the present. It is happening right now. We're now a year into this global pandemic. And then we think about where we are and what that means. How do we redeem the soul of our nation? How do we look at the work of Dr. King, who talked about justice, who talked about equality, who wanted to bend the arm of justice so that Black people and people that were economically challenged could be a part of the discussions? How do we do that at a time that in the midst of COVID-19, the Black community is being disproportionately impacted? That it's hard to think about this without taking into account what I call Black COVID stories. And I situate Black COVID stories alongside COVID-19, right? So you have this whole continuum of COVID-19, but within that, Black people are being disproportionately impacted. The research shows that even though Black people make up 13.1% of the population, we make up 39% of the COVID deaths. That Black women are more likely to get COVID-19, Black men are more likely to die from it. That Black people are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19, and that if you look also at the data when it comes to Black children and Hispanic children are more likely to die from COVID-19, and they don't know why. They don't know why Black and brown children are dying of COVID-19. They are not sure why, leading to hospitalizations, even if you catch it early, that Black people are unable to fight off COVID-19 and survive. But these are the questions that we wrestle with when we talk about redeeming the soul of our nation, knowing that Dr. King's vision and dream may have just been about racial justice and then economic justice. But when we open that up, we have to take into account environmental justice. We have to take into account, educational justice. We have to take into account the justice around health and equality in this country. These are some of the issues that we must open up the space to really think deeply about what type of world we want to live in and what type of world do we want to leave to our children. What time are we in? I want to suggest to you, here on only a day or so after we actually celebrated Dr. King's actual birthday, and then we're on the eve of America's celebration of Dr. King's birthday, I want to suggest that we're standing on hallowed ground, on holy ground. Now we know that we're also standing on stolen ground, right? But that the ground that we're on is mixed with our blood and mixed with our sweat and mixed with our tears. That Frederick Douglass in 1848 said, and he was particularly talking about the Black community, that the Black community had grown up with this country and that they had watered the soil with their tears, nourished it with their blood, and tilled it with their hard hands. Dr. King, in looking at Frederick Douglass's words, said, then who then does America belong to? He said, America, because our blood is in the soil, we have a right to claim the American dream as ours as well. Who is it that speaks for those who are unable to speak for themselves? Dr. King himself said, I am not the only person who's concerned about justice. I am just the person who's given the microphone, who's just speaking into it. On the eve of the Montgomery bus boycott, and I think that's important because we're on the eve of kind of the American celebration of Dr. King's birthday, which I get a little challenged about. It's a day of service, but I'm like, it really should be a day for people to wrestle with Dr. King's words and not just the I have a dream speech, which is the easy one, but really get into the speeches around staying awake during the Great Revolution and being challenged around what that means. But on the eve of the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King had just recently arrived in town, 26 years old. They had selected him to be the face and the voice of the movement, but he gave his first speech. Prior to that, no one knew who Dr. King was. And the argument is made by Dr. Claiborne Carson that if Dr. King had not been selected, the Montgomery bus boycott may have lasted a day or two. It definitely wouldn't have made its way to the front pages of the New York Times, some campaign in Montgomery. But Claiborne Carson said Dr. King got to the mic, 26 years old, giving his first sermon that really solidified his position as the new wave of the civil rights movement. And he spoke about how history's going to record that you were here at this moment and that you helped to change the world. And if you look back on that, how would he know that the Montgomery bus boycott, which wasn't even a day old at that point, they had done one day. How would he know that they would have to walk over 382 days altogether? How would he know that by the time they got to the end, they would break the back of Jim Crow in Montgomery? How would he know that people would have to make the decision to walk every day? How would he know that? But when he said, when the history books are written, when your children go back and read, they will know that at the moment when it was important, when it was vital, when it was necessary, you stood up to be counted. That when I think about redeeming the soul of our nation, I think about that. That in that moment, when history records standing up, what are they going to record you as doing? W.B. Du Bois said that the cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. That if we want to be free, then part of it is pushing back. And pushing back is a part of this country. In 1642, for example, which was about 312 years before the beginning of the modern civil rights era, and I marked the modern civil rights era as beginning in 1954 with the passage of the Brown v. Board decision. Now, prior to that, there had been a number of civil rights cases, but that was the one, the culmination of all these cases together with Brown v. Board, that really started the walk towards implementing what integration was going to look like. So in 1642, you actually have the first documented Black protests to happen in this country. So if you think about the line, the first 20 or so Africans arrived in this country in 1619, that it was a long walk to get us to that point. But by 1642, you had the first documented Black protest in this country. It happened in New York, which was the Council of New Netherland, but it was 11 enslaved men and women petitioned for and won their freedom. I mean, think about it. It's like just going all the way back to 1642, enslaved men and women were actually protesting and putting in cases, and they won their freedom in the Council of New Netherland. But because of that, this is why whenever there's a huge shift and change in this country, there's always backlash, or as the New York Times says, white lash, because as soon as they won their freedom, the next thing that happened is laws begin to be enacted designed to restrict the rights of Black people, to stop them from organizing, petitioning, and fighting for their freedom, like pulling at whiteness and not being moved or cowered into defeat. It's important to note that it's a desire to be free. It's a desire to be equal. That even though we know nonviolence with Dr. King, in 1642, the first documented Black protest was a nonviolent protest. And Dr. King writes about how there's this notion that you have to understand that you can't pick up weapons against an enemy who has bigger guns. So you can't go out to fight for your freedom and take guns in your merry band against one of the greatest countries in the world. You have to be nonviolent in the face of violence, because your fight must be a fight based upon touching the humanity of people. It has to go beyond just struggling and physically fighting to be free. It's about getting into people's soul. That struggle is as much a part of our American experience as racism and as whiteness. And I would argue that these are the twin cousins of white supremacy that flow from and into one another. Ta-Nehisi Coates sees it a little bit differently. He sees that racism is the child of white supremacy. I see it a little bit differently. I think white supremacy is at the foundation, and from that, you get all the other forms of oppression, and racism is one of them, because that flows into the ways in which we deal with the dangerous and frightening threads that work to keep us oppressed, that even if we pull on them, that we have to recognize that part of the work is in the dismantling. That when you look at the landscape, and we're talking now about just the last 4 years or so, you think about Charlottesville, and you think about what happened at the Capitol just a week and a half ago. What is the root of all that? When did we have the big uptick in far right white supremacy? Well, according to all the research, they saw the uptick right after the election of Barack Obama. I don't think it is a mistake that right after the election of the first Black man into the White House, there's a huge uptick in organizing of far right white supremacists. So the FBI said the chatter has been out there, and it has been rooted in race. That the discussion was, what does it mean to this country to have that man in office, and what can we do? Now, going back to Dr. King, it is interesting because one of the things I was looking at just with what happened at the Capitol, what was interesting to me is who spoke up and who didn't. And what did people say? The people that you align yourself with, the people that you spend time with, What were they saying at that moment? Because when they didn't speak is when I was concerned. If you don't speak up in that particular moment, how can I ever expect you to stand up, right? How can you not do it when you have that much at stake? Dr. King talked about that in his letter from a Birmingham jail. And I often tell people that they have to go back and get the context of the letter from a Birmingham jail. And I just want to give a little bit of the context so that we're all on the same page. But that with that push in Birmingham, Dr. King had only been in Birmingham for 8 days before he was arrested. It was supposed to be a large march of adults in Birmingham. When Dr. King was arrested, a lot of the adults were a little bit nervous. Like the concern was, okay, Dr. King has swooped in, and by that time he's a superstar, right? He swoops in, he gets in front of the movement, and then he's gone, and we have to deal with the backlash once he's gone. And in Birmingham, and 63 people are like, I don't want to deal with the backlash. I'm going to go to work. He's in jail. He's not even on the street. And if you remember, it was Reverend Wyatt T. Walker and Andrew Young talking to Dr. King, visiting him in jail, saying the people don't want to march, like they want to go to work. And that was a discussion around, then let's see about the college students. And when the college students got arrested, okay, then let's get the high students out there. Okay, so when the high school students got arrested, Dr. King kept sending them out younger and younger. And if we remember, of course, Birmingham with the Birmingham Children's Campaign, that's when you had 4, 5, and 6-year-olds out there marching. I'm not sure they knew what they were marching for, but Dr. King said children on the front line with water hoses, with dogs, with police officers, getting arrested. Like, that's how you touch people's humanity. How can you be silent in that moment when you see children suffer? How can you be silent? Dr. King wrote in that letter, and I'm quoting here, I have almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. So what does that mean? Dr. King was coming against white pastors, the moderates, who are saying, you need to be comfortable, you need to wait, you need to stand down until everything works its way out. And Dr. King, who is a lot more radical than people want to recognize or give credit for, said, we're not going to stand by. I was listening to, I think, Roger at the top when he was talking about how it's not radical to, the use of the word radical. So, and I used radical on purpose because Claiborne Carson said it was radical to think about actually dismantling Jim Crow. I mean, it's radical to think about the number of times that Dr. King actually went to jail on a regular basis. It was radical to think about the fact that, somebody broke through and stabbed him and it was so close to his heart. If he had sneezed, he would have died. It was radical what he was doing. And when we kind of bring him down and says, well, he's like a grandfather talking about freedom and we shall overcome and singing Kumbaya, you take away the very real stance of how every day, and Dr. King wrote about this in his papers, every day he recognized that his life was in danger. That every day he recognized this could be my last day. This is the day when somebody could get through. One of the threats that are out there to kill me could actually happen. But even on his way to eventually, as we know, go on his way to where he got assassinated, he had to get off the plane. It was a bomb threat called in, and everybody had to get off the plane when he was on his way to Memphis, Tennessee, because the pilot got on and said, "Is Dr. King on board?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, he's right there." We all have to get off because someone just said they put a bomb on this plane to kill everybody so they can get to you. So he knew, and that was radical to think I could actually die today. Not some broad kind of concept that it might happen because I may make the wrong turn, but there actually is a chance that this could be the last day of my life. Coretta Scott King, who really is one of my favorites. She is a shero for me because it was a Coretta Scott King who did the work to make sure that Martin Luther King Jr.'s contribution was not forgotten. It was Coretta Scott King whose greatest contribution, I would argue to us, is that she's the one that fought to make sure that Dr. King's birthday became a holiday. That was her work. That was her legacy to make sure that her husband's sacrifice was not forgotten. But Coretta Scott King said, freedom is never really won. You earn it and you win it in every generation. That freedom has to be something that you are willing to fight for every single day. I want to go now, before we go to the questions, I'm just going to share your screen if I may. And I think, Roger, I have the ability to do that.
Yes, you do.
Okay, good. And everyone should see it now. Let me just play the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So there are some images that I have selected that I want to just pull up, and I want to talk about them before I open them up for questions, because I'm talking about this notion of redeeming the soul of our nation. I'm also want to wrap this around to where does God fit in all of this? What does it mean to follow the gospel? And why I think that is something that is needed a little bit more in today's struggle. For the "I Am a Man" march that you're watching on the screen with the W.B. Du Bois quote, what I think is interesting, and Claiborne Carson talks about this, is the amount of time that was spent in prayer before these marches, really understanding that what you are being called to do at this moment is larger than you. I think that is amazing. Like I'm just in awe sometimes. It's always around this time of the year, as an aside. I call up everyone I know that lived through Jim Crow, and I just call and thank them. And they get so tired of me. I like call my aunt, my uncle, my dad. I thank them all, because even if you were not marching out in the streets, the fact that you chose to survive every day within this very racist and hostile and oppressive and wicked system, and you still held on to your faith, and you still held on to your humanity, like that is a testament and a testimony that I think is important for us to recognize. With Coretta Scott King and her quote, at the top is something that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to always talk about: where are we going to be tomorrow? That we're actually only one step away, one struggle away, one march away, one arrest away from getting to where we want to be tomorrow. And I get challenged about that. When I get to my tomorrow, what do I want it to look like? What am I willing to sacrifice today so that my tomorrow looks different? What have we given up over the last 4 years that we're now willing to claim so that our tomorrow can look better? What will tomorrow look like for all of us? And I think that is a hard question. It may be easy for some. That's a hard question for me at this moment, really because of COVID-19 and how it's impacting my community. I argue that the future started on 11/2/2020. I put that because Dr. King said, our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about the things that matter. That when we organize, when we get involved, when we raise our voice, that the work that was done, not just in the country more generally, but really specifically in Georgia, in a place where the political system was set up with the intense purpose of suppressing the Black vote. Like, that is why Georgia's system is the way that it is. It was set up and designed to stop the block of Black people voting together. Like, that was the whole purpose. And so what Stacey Abrams and Latasha Brown and the activists in Georgia have been working to do is dismantle a system that was designed to stop them from voting. Doing that at the same time of knowing that none of this matters if we can't get home. None of it matters if we can't ultimately change the system. I put this picture in that with the Frederick Douglass quote, even though this is from the civil rights movement, this is from the Birmingham Children's Campaign. Dr. King believed that people's heart would be touched by having children attacked by dogs. Now, the dogs at this time, when you look at Birmingham, Alabama, Bull Connor had a special nickname. They call the German Shepherds the N-word. And so whenever there was a problem, he would say, go get the N-word, and the cops would know he was talking about the German Shepherds, and then put them on the children. That these were the photographs that were broadcast around the planet. Like, the UN picked up on these pictures. And these were the photographs where the pressure began to come in at the White House, which got John F. Kennedy squarely involved and had him, of course, spoke from the Oval Office about what was happening with the Birmingham Children's Campaign, touching the heart and soul of people. That is something that, if you're talking about struggle and progress, it is being willing to put our children, and that's something that concerns me, being willing to put our children in the face of this type of danger, just so that we can have a better tomorrow. I chose this when I wanted to just show the organizing of women, along with indigenous communities, with the quote from Angela Davis about freedom being a constant struggle, that it is not something that we get and we reserve. Just like I shared the Coretta Scott King quote about how freedom is won in every generation, Malcolm X said that if you're not willing to die for freedom, then you should take the word freedom out of your vocabulary. Because if it's not something you're willing to give your life for, then you don't know what you don't have, which is something I'm thinking about this week. Perhaps Donald Trump showed us what we didn't have. Nina Simone said, freedom means no fear. And I am often very fearful about what's happening in this country. I struggle with this quote. I'm like, then I don't have that kind of freedom. As a Black mother, co-raising with my husband 2 African-American sons, I don't have that sense of not having any fear. I'm fearful when they go outside. I'm fearful when they drive. I'm fearful when they protest. I'm fearful when they go to college. And now with COVID-19, I'm fearful for my parents. My dad has all these underlying conditions. So I'm fearful all the way through as a Black woman with all of these things happening. I'm thinking about the fact that Baltimore City schools are opening up. So I'm fearful about Black children going back into schools here in Baltimore City where they didn't have an adequate HVAC system before COVID-19. So they don't have one now. I'm fearful because 60% of ninth graders in Baltimore City are failing at this moment. Freedom means no fear. I am not sure then what freedom would look like in a space where there is so much oppression and there's so much injustice. Just a few more. The Maya Angelou quote, the need for change bulldozed a road down the center of my mind. Dr. King was friends with Maya Angelou. She was part of a group where they would come and they would sing to open up the civil rights movement, all the activities. Her and Bernice Johnson Reagan would be there to just add song. Nikki Giovanni would be there adding poetry. But how much do you want change? How much are you willing to sacrifice for change? And then what does change look like? I am very challenged in this moment because I knew at some point we would get to the other side of Donald Trump, but I often wondered, what will history record about what I was doing for the last 4 years, right? We're only a couple of days away from the next administration. What have you been doing for 4 years? I think complaining on Facebook is not enough. Have you been actively organizing over the last 4 years that you can then take that forward? Asada Shakur said, we have nothing to lose but our chains. But I chose that picture about racism is the pandemic, since we know that there's the argument that Black folks are living under a twindemic, right? Where it's Black Lives Matter meets Black COVID stories. And we're dealing with Black people dying from COVID-19 and the fact that for the fifth year in a row, we had 300 plus homicides in Baltimore City. It's a twindemic, that it is affecting us on every end. And then finally, Langston Hughes, which is a poem that he wrote about democracy and about America and about what does that mean to fight for democracy in a country. Someone said that in America, Black people in America, we fight for a country that doesn't love us. We push hard in a country that acts like they don't need us. We struggle in a country that makes us feel like we don't matter, that we love this country more, and we fight and we struggle for it. It is what you are willing to sacrifice to get to the other side. So I will stop it here in terms of redeeming our nation, the soul of our nation, because I think it's a much deeper question than just organizing in the street. It's a much deeper question than just voter registration. It's about what is the commitment that you're willing to make to be a part of this American experiment called democracy. I write a bi-monthly column for the Afro. And one of the things I wrote about in one of my last columns of 2020 is I argued that Donald Trump was a necessary evil. And let me tell you why I said that, and then I'll open for questions. Because prior to Donald Trump, I think that people were very comfortable with allowing government to work on their behalf. I think people were not very engaged. We saw very low voter turnout numbers during Barack Obama's second term, mayoral elections, midterm elections. I think people just expected government to just work somehow, and that the president would just tell us when it concerns us and we would go on about our business. Donald Trump forced people, and this is people that were not always engaged, people sometimes who didn't recognize the oppression of others. It forced people to engage with politics. 7-year-olds were talking about Donald Trump in politics. 10-year-olds were talking about voter suppression. 15-year-olds saying we need to register to vote. That was incredible. You think about the number of people over the last 4 years that have been having political conversations everywhere from the classroom to the bathrooms. You go to the bathroom and wash our hands, and you're washing your hands. I'm like, what do you think about what Donald Trump said? Like, we were talking about politics in ways that have never happened before in this country because of Donald Trump. Now, could we have done without Donald Trump? Absolutely. But think about it. Think about how many people turned out in the middle of a global pandemic when they could die from voting, and they turned out to vote anyway. They showed up to vote in person because they were afraid that the mail system would not get their ballot delivered in time. People, this is a very different level of engagement, but it changed everything. And what we saw with Donald Trump as a necessary evil, we saw Georgia flip blue. We saw the South send up a Democratic president. We saw massive engagement on every single level, not just the baby boomer crowd, which is always actively engaged, but all the way down, every single person. And maybe that's what we find to be important. Maybe we didn't recognize what democracy was until we were in danger of losing it. And then it became part of who we are and why it's important. So with that, I'll go to some of your questions. I don't know, Roger or Barbara, if you're going to field the questions or if you just want me to grab them.
I started. This is Jeannie. Hi.
Hi.
And thank you so much. So much to chew on. So much to chew on. Thank you. I'll start with Suzanne. who I'm going to abbreviate it just a little bit, Suzanne. Why or how are people convinced, deeply convinced, to work against their own interests? Not just I'll just read it, I guess. While recognizing them as their interests, they don't deny that, but overwhelmingly feel the need to deny it to others. The counterpoint is that up until recently, Jewish voters were known to vote against their economic interests, even as they moved to the suburbs and assimilated. But Suzanne is talking about the so-called blue-collar workers, flyover country, etc. They also use the same language of freedom and revolution. You know, how do we teach people, children, and adults to use their critical faculties? Because the same language could be quoted for many purposes. And there's a follow-on.
Okay.
But
so I'll split that into two parts. Thank you, Suzanne, for your question. The first part, I think, could be best answered by Nell Painter. Nell Painter is a professor emerita from Princeton University, and she wrote a book called The History of Whiteness. And in her book, The History of Whiteness, she talks about the creation of white categories. What does it mean to arrive here from Italy and become a white person? What does it mean to be Asian American, but you're considered to be a white person in terms of your access and ability? That part of the organizing against Black people, to not get people to focus on economics, Suzanne would say, you know, at least you're not Black. You may not have any money, but at least you're not as bad off as, and fill in the blank, a Black person, an immigrant. Nell Painter, in the book, The History of Whiteness, answers that question the best. The second part of your question, which is around how do we engage young people? How do we teach them? And I would argue that teachers have been doing that. 4 years ago, as you know, Suzanne, when Donald Trump was being inaugurated, I had on the campus of Loyola University, I launched the Trump Teach-In. Now, it's just think about my whole life, I think I've been so focused on this man, I probably haven't done much, but we did a Trump Teach-In where I created Trump syllabus K-12. And we had professors and K-12 teachers, kindergarten to 12th grade teachers around the country teaching and engaging. How do we teach about Trump before he was inaugurated, right? That's all we were doing. And the last 4 years, that's all teachers have been doing. Trump, every step of the way, has come up and has been engaged. And I think that we're now recognizing that civics as a course must be re-implemented back into the curriculum. We cannot assume that people figure out what it means to be a part of this country. I think Leonard Pitts, who some of you might know his writing, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, but he writes that, you know, we don't have a lot of responsibilities to America. Like, you know, we don't have mandatory military service anymore. You know, you pay your taxes, you hang out, and you can die, right? But that civics teaches us that the number one responsibility we have to our country is to vote and be involved in helping to maintain this notion of democracy. And so teachers are now fighting to get civics re-implemented so that people can learn, not when they're 42, not when they're 27, but they're learning at 7 and 8 and 9, that democracy is fragile. And the only way that democracy remains is that we help to steward democracy and we help to shape it.
Thank you. I want to also read the follow-on to Suzanne's question, because I think it's an important one. Does redemption of America require what South Africa did, specifically with regard to truth and reconciliation, or are there other means? It's needed both North and South. And Suzanne writes, I fear it's too easy for me to think of it as a Southern problem. It's way more than that. Can you speak to that, Dr. Whitehead?
I can speak to that. I also want to recognize Lisa and Emma when I said civics, and they went like, yeah, I see you, Lisa and Emma, me too. So I agree with what you were saying about South Africa. South Africa did the whole reconciliation. And in so many ways with the long eye of history, they make the argument that reconciliation shouldn't have happened without accountability. Reconciliation does not actively change the economic or racial situation. It just makes people feel good that you're being reconciled. You've asked for forgiveness and you're getting it. That there cannot be any forgiveness. There cannot be any reconciliation until there is accountability. When I lived in South Africa for a short period of time, we used to drive around and you see all these beautiful houses, all fenced in. And the activists who have fought to end apartheid said that's what reconciliation looks like. They're in there with the big houses and the gates, and we're out here in the shanty towns. We don't have apartheid anymore, and we've had reconciliation, but there's no accountability. You cannot get to reconciliation without accountability. And I think America sometimes jumps too quickly to forgiveness without looking to hold people accountable, that there has to be some accountability. And I think, let me just say,
sometimes.
Yeah. And I want to note that accountability is also wrapped up in race, right? Because we are quick to hold Black people and Hispanic people and immigrants and people economically challenged. They get held accountable. But when you're white, and particularly if you're white and privileged, and even more if you're white, male and privileged, accountability looks very different and sometimes doesn't happen at all.
Thank you. Neil Rubin writes, the Jewish community makes a great deal about the friendship between Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. How does the Black community see that relationship, at least in historic terms, and not how it may or may not resonate today?
Oh, that's taught as part of the curriculum, what the connection is between the Jewish community under Dr. King and Rabbi Herschel. So that is something that was taught. I think that what is interesting is that people are trying to see a path from there to here. Like when we talk about Black Lives Matter, who are the allies of Black Lives Matter? The difference is that Dr. King became the figurehead of the civil rights movement, right? And so Black Lives Matter, which is really my son's movement, you're talking about the young millennials, and you bring up some of the zillennials that seem to have a disdain for a leader. Like they are leaderful at the same time with being leaderless, right? So there's no Dr. King, but there's a number of Bayard Russes. There's a number of people who are doing the organizing on the ground, but there's not one person you look to and go, well, who's the Dr. King that we can then look and see who the allies are? I think that on the ground, the local activist work is what we're looking at. What is the relationship between the Jewish community and the white community and the Hispanic community, and the Asian community, and the Black community around the issues of humanity and justice and equity and equality? And it looks very different depending upon what city you're in and who's doing the activist work. So I think that question can be applied differently here in Baltimore. I do see a direct connection when you look out at the work that's being done with Baltimore Ceasefire, Safe Streets, that it seems to crosses over with races and ethnicities and religious backgrounds where people are fighting for equity and justice for everyone in this city. And so it's kind of a hard question because Black Lives Matter is not set up in the same way that the civil rights movement was set up.
Thank you. Ayala Hecht writes, would Dr. King have continued on a nonviolent path for civil rights? Obviously it's speculation, but what do you think?
It's speculation, but it's the same question I asked Dr. Claiborne Carson on Friday. And I invite you to listen to the show tomorrow at 4, where I will actually air my interview with Dr. Claiborne Carson. But would Dr. King have remained nonviolent? When Dr. King leaned in to this notion of nonviolence, it wasn't just for the moment. It was a part of how he lived his life. He had studied it in high school. He had studied it when he went to college. He had written his work about it when he was in theology school. Like nonviolence was something he had really studied from not just Gandhi, but also from Christ. And like, what did that mean to take a nonviolent stand and to continue with that? I think that Dr. King, and I asked Claiborne Carson, what would Dr. King be like, if he had lived? He'd be here today, 92 years old, right? But that Dr. King, he argues that Dr. King would still be active and still be moving and still trying to push the long arm of history. But that's all speculative, right? You don't know. I think Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, they are remembered at a time and a moment in history. They were young. We didn't see what happened to them. We didn't see them become John Lewis. We didn't see them become Nelson Mandela. We didn't see them get tried and grow and struggle and sometimes make wrong decisions and try to make it better. Like you don't have that when someone gets cut down at 39, like they're forever young. So we don't know. We don't know who Dr. King would have become or what Dr. King would have done. And I think that that is part of our fascination and our wonder about Dr. King. Who would he have become during these times? Except we can look at the lives of people who lived during that time. And on the best end, you have a John Lewis, right? Who then got actively involved in politics and helping to shape this nation, who still got involved in sit-ins, right? At his age, when they were sitting in at the Capitol, he went and sat down with them. John Lewis is the best, but there are a number of Black men and women who came through the civil rights movement who didn't fare as well. Some who became angry, some who became bitter, some where life didn't really change for them. Dr. King was a superstar, and I think superstars have a different way of living their experience. And it'll be interesting to see, who will Barack Obama become? Because Barack Obama today at 50 something years old can't be the Barack Obama that he'll be at 70 something years old or 80 something years old, right? So that's how I would answer that. We don't know.
Rabbi Katz asks, is there a difference between nonviolence and peaceful protest? If so, how do you understand the difference?
Is there a difference between nonviolence and a peaceful protest?
Yeah.
When Dr. King wrote about nonviolence, that nonviolence was a spiritual connection. Nonviolence was the way that you choose to live your life. Nonviolence was about courage in the face of danger. That it's nonviolence, it meant that you were still active and you were still willing to put your life on the line. It was also an organizing tactic, right? That the nonviolence movement is the foundation, and out of that peaceful protest becomes an arm off of that. It is not alongside of that. At the root is nonviolence. And then from that, it becomes peaceful protest, it becomes teach-ins, it becomes, writing op-eds, and all of these are part of being nonviolent, but also looking to make change. So peaceful protests are a part of nonviolence, but I think that a peaceful protest changes very quickly depending upon who's there. Not everybody who shows up at a peaceful protest is willing to go all the way. I think there comes a point, and I think maybe we're at that point now in 2021, where people have gotten to the point where they are no longer comfortable with having the cops just beat down on us, and we just take it. I think that young people have seen the result of that. That is ironic that Dr. King preached nonviolent and was shot and killed on a balcony outside of his hotel. It's ironic that Medgar Evers preached nonviolence and was shot and killed in his driveway. It's ironic that the parents of the 4 little girls preached nonviolence and they were blown up inside of a church getting ready for Sunday service. We have to understand that the young people today have read that history, that have studied that history, and nonviolence doesn't keep you safe. So how much do you take? I think that we've reached a point where people are not as comfortable with nonviolence when children, Tamir Rice, Ayanna Jones, are being shot and killed. It's not making sense to millennials anymore.
Debbie Steinig writes, the Trump years also exposed the dark underbelly of democracy, the ability of a populist leader to manipulate the electorate. Some of the safeguards we're calling on now aren't particularly democratic, like relying on big tech to deplatform bad actors in the absence of any real government policy. And some might feel they prefer the benevolent dictatorship of big tech to democracy with populist demagogues. Thoughts?
I'm sorry. You froze up a little bit, Jeannie.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I can try again. It's all in the chat, but
no, I saw it, and that's why I started laughing. I started laughing because I know that part of this work around Donald Trump when it comes to shutting him out of Twitter and Facebook. I mean, he was shut off of Shopify. I'm like, so you can't shop online. I mean, it got ridiculous after a point. I'm like, Grubhub had no need to block Donald Trump, right? Like, I think that at some point, like, it just became ridiculous with what was going on. Like, my son's like, he's like, you can't get on Disney Plus. I'm like, I don't even get on Disney Plus. I don't think that's really a way of stopping what is happening. I think that particular push, and I'll be very honest and transparent, it made me nervous. As I cheered, it made me nervous, right? Because if you are cutting off a white, very privileged man, president of the United States, you cut him off at the knees, then what about Black Lives Matter activists? What about the work I do around race and justice? If that's no longer popular, then you just silence me. Not that I am saying that he should be able to do whatever he wants. They should have put safeguards in place. But when you say we're going to block you out of sight, if you can do it to Donald Trump, my concern is that who's next? Who else is going to be cut off to say, you know what, this person's stirring up things, and let's just shut him down. I thought that was a very interesting decision. I understand that people were making these knee-jerk reactions after what happened at the Capitol. There was a pressure that you have to respond and do something immediately. And if you stand up, Grubhub, then we recognize that in this moment, Grubhub is saying we don't want the country to be overthrown. Okay, I get that. I think that as we breathe a little bit more, we start recognizing, as many of us did after 9/11, what we give up in terms of freedom. The price sometimes is more than maybe we want to pay. Because after 9/11, with the Patriot Act, we gave up a lot of freedom in the name of being safe, freedoms we've never had restored to us. And that's what makes me nervous. So what else do you take? And is there any space for the free and open debate and exchange? Do I want white supremacists organizing to overthrow the Capitol? No, I don't. What I wanted is for the people who were charged with taking care of the Capitol to be able to do their job. That's what I wanted, right? So there has to be a way that both things can exist at the same time, because today it's the far white supremacists, tomorrow what is it? Organizers around race, justice, and gender. That's my concern. Where does it end? Is it a slippery slope? And that makes me a little nervous.
Yep, you're not alone. And Debbie also asks, how much consensus or controversy was there around the Birmingham Children's Campaign?
There was a lot of controversy. Parents were very upset and concerned that Dr. King, and they later found out that Dr. King had it as a strategy to put children on the front line. I think when we look back, I think there's a way to say, oh, this was an excellent decision, that it ended up with changing and the hearts of those that sat on the United Nations and putting international pressure on the government to make changes. But who here would say, yes, I want my 4-year-old to be attacked by dogs so we can change this country? Who here would raise their hand and say, I want my 10-year-old to be arrested and held in a pig pen and having cold water thrown on them every hour for 4 days so that we can break the back of Jim Crow? I think that question is the same question I wrestle with. Who here would say, take my child and try the new vaccine for COVID-19 on my 7-year-old and see whether it works or not? Freedom is different when you're talking about sacrificing your own children. There was a lot of controversy about it. And I want to add 2 things which people sometimes don't like. Number one, the decision was made by all men. I do think it's important that there were no mamas in the room, because I think at least one mom would have been like, no, we're not putting 5-year-olds on the front line. Like, we're not going to do that. This is all, men, pastors. And it was being led by men who did not live in Birmingham. I think that those 2 factors, I would argue, are important. You don't live in Birmingham. You don't know our children. You don't know little, Rashida. You don't know little, Kofi. You don't know them. So you think you just put them online because it's nameless, faceless. But I wonder if anybody had been in the room who was a mom, anybody who had been there, who was a pastor of a local church, saying, no, I don't want to put little John on the front line. He just turned 7. Like maybe we can find another way to do that. So there was a lot of controversy, and even today, it's all often debated whether that was the best strategy, not to get to the ultimate end, but what was the impact on the children there. And then also think too that that happened in Birmingham, and that happened in what, May, June. And what happened by the time you got after the March on Washington, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed children later that year by the time you got to September, October. So people wonder about that, as they wonder about a number of Dr. King's strategies, now that we have a long eye of history.
We have a few more questions. I don't know what our time frame is. I wasn't sure how late this is going, but I do have more comments if you're up for comments and questions. If you're
sure,
up for
I'll answer a few more. Barbara, is that okay? I'm looking at Barbara. Is that okay to answer a couple more?
You gotta unmute yourself, Barbara.
I'm trying to do that. I think, we have the ability to go longer if Dr. Whitehead, that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'll answer a couple more. Sure.
Yeah, we want to be respectful of your time. So.
Oh yeah, no. I'll answer a couple more. I have coffee, so I'm good.
You're good. Excellent. I've got ginger ale. How would you compare the litigation brought by Thurgood Marshall and Charles Houston and others versus the protests led by Dr. King and others back then and today?
So back then, Dr. King, in terms of the protest movements in the streets and keeping people uplifted and keeping them motivated and keeping the pressure on, he said that they would never have been successful if they didn't also have the arm of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Like, it was the organizing inside of the courtrooms that went along with the organizing in the streets. To get the courts to change, you need the pressure of what's happening in the streets, but the courts won't change if it's just the pressure in the streets. That you needed both of those things to work together to bring about change. So it's not just, I'll use it and bring it to a modern example. It's not just us marching every day when Freddie Gray was killed. And some of you might have been involved in that. I know I was. I marched for 10 days straight. It was also Marilyn Mosby then indicting the police officers. Now, ultimately, they were not found guilty. We know that, but it had to work together. There had to be both pressure that happened in the court that went along with pressure from the street. The two things cannot exist without each other, because courts are slow to change unless there are things happening in the streets. And we saw that when you give the example of Twitter chopping off the legs of Donald Trump. It was pressure in the streets that led to change. But in order to get to something more substantial, then we would have to take it to the next level. So both of those things, Dr. King recognized that those two things worked in concert with each other. And he was in contact with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund because they would provide lawyers on the spot because Dr. King was getting arrested so much. So I think that was part. And there's also a third arm that the question didn't talk about, but that one arm is the mass mobilization of the street movements. Like, that's one arm of being willing to march, to sit in, to pray in, to die in. But the second arm is in the courts, right? With the Legal Defense Fund, the work that Cheryl and Eiffel is still doing today on the backs of, say, Thurgood Marshall. But there's a third arm, and that's around changing legislation. Like having people to actually push through, the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act or the Fair Housing Act. That these three arms must work together, because we've been marching in the street for Black Lives Matter and nothing has changed, right? So you got to have Black Lives Matter with holding police officers accountable, with changing the legislation so that we can have more equity in policing. All three things have to work together. But ultimately, what Dr. King argued, to get all the other two arms working, it's the mass mobilization in the streets first that gets the other two arms to move.
Thank you so much. All we have, there's a comment and a question that I don't know that anybody can answer, but I'll start with the comment and then the question. The comment from Joan Roth thinks that the Twitter reaction was not such a knee-jerk thing, that there's no such thing as totally free speech, that it has to be responsible. We're not crying fire in a theater and not spreading lies. So that's a comment from Joan. And the question that It's
Can
a
I
tough one to
respond
answer.
to that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, I want to respond. The reason why I use the term knee jerk, Joan, is that people have been calling for Twitter to stop Donald Trump for 4 years. Like we've been saying, cut him off for 4 years. And they always said, no, we're not going to do that. He has a right to speak. That when that happened at the Capitol, I say it was knee jerk because of in less than 48 hours, every single platform said we have to do something. And when I mentioned Grubhub and Shopify, it was because these are not even platforms that he utilized, but everybody all of a sudden had to make a statement against this president. It reminds me, if I may, of what happened after George Floyd died. After George Floyd died, we were talking about justice and equality. And if you remember, every company had to make a statement. So Amazon, when you went onto Amazon, they had a statement that came up about how they believe in justice. Babynames.com on the front page had the names of all the people that have been killed by the police. I mean, who goes on babynames.com thinking about justice and equality? But they had to make a statement. Everybody had to make a statement to show, no, we don't believe that, Black men should die this way. That to me is the same thing that happened with Twitter and Facebook. We've got to make this public statement. It's over time what happens next. And that is where I get concerned. Yes, Amazon, I understand. I'm just trying to order some stuff offline. I don't need a whole long statement about how you believe in Black Lives Matter before I can order my new tennis shoes. But you have to say something because everybody's saying something. And that's what I mean by knee jerk. We do a lot of the knee jerk reactions here, but that doesn't change policy. Cutting Donald Trump off of Twitter in so many ways fails to get to the heart of the fact that Trump may be gone, but Trumplicans and the belief that something is fundamentally wrong in this country will continue. It's looking at the articles that are coming out where the Trumplicans now feel that Donald Trump has abandoned them and they're willing to move beyond him to bring about these changes. Donald Trump did not start far-right white supremacy in this country. He may have emboldened them, but he did not start it, which means cutting him off Twitter will not end it.
I agree with you totally. I was just thinking about the idea of giving him a platform for this time, and I think it's hard not to draw a line from that platform to where he got. And I also agree with you that there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions, and it's very difficult to hear a lot of the very conservative Republicans all of a sudden going, oh no, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, big surprise, right?
Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And so there's one final question, Jen?
Yeah, the last one.
Yeah.
Jeannie, I know it's spelled funny.
Jeannie. I'm sorry. Jeannie.
No worries. It's all good. Again, I don't know how you answered this one, but how do you explain that 74 million people voted for Trump after seeing his behavior for 4 years?
Donald Trump got more votes in the history of this country than Joe Biden. Just think about that. More people voted for Donald Trump than any other president in history except for Joe Biden. Donald Trump did not start far-right white supremacy. Donald Trump leaving office will not end it. I think there's something fundamentally flawed in this country. And I think that is really what the fight is going to be. It is an interesting time in American history. If we look down in Washington, D.C., having to talk about this on the radio, I'm like, what does it mean that at this moment we have more members of the National Guard protecting the Capitol than we have in Iraq and Afghanistan combined? What does it mean that the National Guard is actually sleeping in the Capitol? They have been told they cannot leave until after the inauguration. What does it mean that they're now having to check that every single member of the National Guard that's in DC, everyone with the Capitol Police, they have to check to see if they have any kind of leanings towards far-right white supremacy for the fear that there might be an insurrection from the inside? What does it mean that we have elected officials who are now being called out by name with having helped plan this? That there's something fundamentally flawed in this country. And it's like Leonard Pitts said, we have kicked the can down the road of race for so long that we are now out of road. Like we are at that moment. So I don't know what this country is going to look like when Joe Biden is elected. I don't know if that's going to change things or make it worse. It's actually, and I don't scare easily. I'm not saying I'm scared. I am very concerned though. I am concerned looking at the way that Washington, D.C. is being cut off from the rest of the country because of the fear that something might happen there. The part that got me the most was watching looking at the pictures of Black men and women cleaning up what had been done, the damage done by the white supremacists. There's so many messages in that. Pictures that we still haven't seen. Hearing AOC say that, she felt the real threat that she would be killed, not from the people outside of the doors, but from the people inside. So she's talking about other elected officials threatened her while they were in that room. There's something wrong. And I think we're going to continue to see it unravel until we deal with it. And I don't know what dealing with it will look like. I don't. Because it took so long to get to this moment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Roger, Barbara, do you have any?
Just want to thank Dr. Whitehead for a very thought-provoking talk.
Thank you very much. I want to invite everyone to the MLK convocation. I'm looking at Suzanne. This is from Loyola University Maryland on Wednesday, and I'm putting it in the chat. I think Wednesday's the 20th. If you go online, if you type in Loyola University MLK convocation, I'm so excited about this, but Loyola is bringing virtually, they're bringing Ibram Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I will be in conversation with Dr. Kendi for the MLK convocation. And I'd like to, so far we have 1,000 people signed up from all over the world. And we'd like to invite you to come and join us virtually and hear this conversation. And then on Thursday, so 2 events for you. Thursday, the 21st. If you go to the MLK convocation, I'm trying to find it. Maybe Suzanne can help me. Suzanne, if you can put up the link. But on Thursday, we have this event called Coffee and Convo. And so what many of you know, I started the Carson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice at Loyola. So I'll be in conversation with Ibram on Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm hosting a virtual coffee house. And I'm inviting people from all over the world to come and join us on Zoom. And let's talk about the inauguration. Let's talk about being anti-racist. Let's talk about what this looks like in our community. We're going to have breakout rooms, and the conversation is going to be facilitated by Dr. Barbara Ransby, who did the book, The Movement for Black Lives, and myself. So 2 events, you can sign up for both of them. They're both free and they're both virtual, but you can engage with us this week as we are talking about how to be anti-racist on the same day that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been inaugurated. I'm very excited about the conversation this week.
Jeannie, can you capture all these addresses?
I will save the chat and I will make sure we have all the links to the things that were discussed.
Great. So, well, Dr. Whitehead,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today, for all that you've shared, and all the work that you're doing, aside from tonight and being with us, just all the work that you're doing in general in terms of trying to help make this a better world.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Barbara, Roger, Jeannie. Bye, Suzanne. Have a good evening.
Well, and I would just add, if I could, the old quote, which speaks to what you had said, reminded me, the comment, I think it was Edmund Burke, who said, all that's necessary for the forces of evil to take over the world is for enough good people to do nothing. So there's our mission, is to not do nothing, but to figure out what we can each do individually. So
thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks so much.